Hi everyone, delonewolf here. Welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And before we get started, I do quickly want to mention that there are economic figures out for February. I haven't looked at them myself, but I did take a look at the comments on the Reddit thread. And there it's, well, basically what's showing up is that Providence is being kicked out, which is something that I personally did expect, of course, with all the outposts that they have there. And then the really only thing that we know is on the roadmap at the moment being the changing from outposts to citadels to special faction citadels. Someone is or was going to make a move on that, and it's yeah, just the likely scenario that's unfolding there, with Providence not being able to hold their space and being forced back. Now, Providence is quite a unique group. I personally do like their philosophy, where they're not threat, don't shoot, and they basically role-play their way to try and extend the Amar influence. So I do fully expect that even if this will be a major setback for them, they will eventually claw their way back into Providence at some point. The other big aspect is, of course, that the Imperium is basically outperforming everyone else when it comes to the production, mining, economic figures, things like that. And well, a comment that does pop up here quite often is, of course, the worry that I also had with skill injectors coming to the game, how this has basically compressed the longevity of any activity in EVE Online at the moment. And yeah, it's all about the Orcals. They make lots and lots of resources, and so there is this resource bonanza basically going on in EVE Online that's never happened before. And I personally do share the worries a little bit about this when it comes to the future of the game. So I would say my personal expectations on both of these fronts is that, yes, as long as the faction citadels, the outposts, aren't changed to faction citadels, Providence will be under siege, but they will make their comeback after that. And when it comes to the economic stability of the game, I personally do see CCP intervention on the horizon. I don't think that they're going to allow this to keep escalating endlessly at the same pace as it's doing at the moment. This is all really just speculation on my part, but I did want to share that perspective after reading through the comments on the latest February economic report. Perhaps I'll take a look at it myself. I definitely recommend that you do so if you are actively trading, for instance, in the game. It'll give you lots of interesting information. Of course, we are here for this week's action in the market, and we are going to start off with plex that is at 3 minutes. There we go. And well, it's more of the same. Plex pretty much flat. The little downturn here is, of course, a CCP sale, a special intervention, and so we are now currently selling Plex for around 3 million in Jita. Buyers are just above 3 million. If we go to the player-owned trade hubs, very little movement there, 3,080,000 ISK, and on the buyer front, very little movement again, going from 3,017,000 to 3,018,000. So really shows a lot of stability, and I'm going to reiterate the point that I've been making in the last few weeks on very stable Plex prices in the last 2 months. My personal feeling here is that people are waiting and seeing what is coming next for EVE Online, and we still don't really have all that much on the roadmap that we know of still. FanFest is coming next month, so we should start to see that information come through at some point. Next up, we'll take a look at the multiple pilot training certificates. Ooh, that's down in price substantially, again on the CCP sale, and I'm surprised that we didn't make a bigger comeback here at this point, because we went from around 1.3 billion down to a low point of 1 billion round, which is definitely very cheap if we think of like the last 6 months. And we only went back up to about 1.1 billion, and still 1 billion for the buyer. So if you're looking to train a second character compared to 3 million Plex prices, this is of course a much cheaper option, and I would definitely consider that if, for instance, you might plan that in the future to have second or a third character and you want to get him as a PI out, for instance, that stocking up on a couple multiple pilot trading certificates might be a good idea. It is a tiny market when CCP doesn't do anything, about 100 to 150 being traded a day. Keep that in mind if you're looking to trade into trading certificates, but just as an investment in future characters, possible other alts that you might want, I personally do feel like this could be a good thing to invest in at this point, considering the chart. We're basically at a 1-year low point here. When it comes to the injectors, let's start with the skill extractors. Of course, it's a mirror of the plex chart, and that is currently selling for 345 million ISK. Buyers are at 339.5. So again, 5 million ISK margin pretty much there. Very, very narrow one on, again, 2 months of stability except for the CCP intervention. On the skill injector front, let's take a look at that. That is interesting to me. A little bit of a resurgence here, going back on that basically 1-year high point plateau that we've been on for 2 months. So a much faster recovery of the large skill injectors from the CCP intervention, which was this little downturn here. Currently selling for 811.5 million in the trade hubs. I am curious about the JITA prices, 832 million. I personally feel like you can immediately see the difference to an item that is also being consumed, and I would say in pretty big numbers at the moment. The margin there, immediately you see a difference between the player trades, the JITA trades themselves. You also see a bit more volatility, a faster response to the end of the sale right here. Price already back to that normalized level, I would say, of more than 800 million ISK. Buyers coming in at 796. Very, very expensive currently, the large skill injectors. I would say it shows lots of demand for, at the moment, injecting skills into characters, creating, well, the best possible Rorcal pilots, carrier pilots, dread pilots, super pilots. All of that stuff is highly being sought after. Add to that the alpha clones, of course, that now have access to all battleships, faction battleships as well, and I think you do have a little bit of a frenzy for skill points at the moment, which is showing up at this 1-year high point and this fast recovery of the price, whereas Plex hasn't recovered and neither has skill extractors. So the only real way to explain that would be to say, yeah, people want those skill points and they saw prices closer or even under 800 million as a great opportunity to just snatch all of that up. Part of it is also going to be speculation, of course. Next up, we have the small skill injectors. That chart is starting to look a little bit better at this point. We're still not at a full year, but at least we are also starting to see some movements and some past references. So I would say again here, decent stability, a little bit of a pull down, but also a much more pronounced recovery than in the Plex market here. Currently selling for 162.5 million and the buyers at 162 million as well. Look at that, no margin whatsoever. Decently high price, not a very high point, but again showing very strong demand, I would say, for skill points. And then finally, we also have the daily alpha injector, which actually goes down in price. That's not really what I expected. 58 million for the sellers, 53 million for the buyers. Oh, actually, it does make sense. This is Plex related, of course. It's the downturn after CCP selling Plex for a cheaper price, which made the conversion to daily alpha injectors on the market much cheaper as well. And as a result, we are down to 55 million pretty much on the chart, and we haven't recovered this yet. I do expect that by next week the daily alpha injectors will be back at the regular price of around 60 million, just because well, it's going to be an interesting data point, I would say. If that does happen, it shows that there is also a decently strong demand from alpha clones. If it doesn't show up, then I would say that it does indicate that the heavy weights in demand for skill points are found in Omega clones and in nullsec related activities especially. So it's an interesting market for sure, but it's also, you can see from the general stability and the lack of margins between sellers and buyers, it's also in a wait and see approach for more information about the game, I would say. Next up, we've got our minerals at 930. There we go. Let's get started with titanium, which has broken the 5 ISK barrier. You can see that here. We're also going to put the filter back to JITA. 481 for the sellers. So sellers have gone below 5 ISK by a decent margin now, and the buyers are coming in at 450, trying to pull the price down even more. Fresh supply last 24 hours, well, we can start around here, so almost a full front page, including another billion units coming in at 486, is continuing to put more pressure on minerals. And well, we know, I would say that there is a little bit more stability still in NASDAQ, so I don't see a change here unless, yeah, I would say really the big boys make a move. The Imperium makes a move on something, an aggressive move. I would say that we're continuing to slowly edge down as more and more supply keeps trickling out some way, not just from the Imperium, but from NASDAQ in general on those stable periods. And that's what's happening. Lots of descriptions of a blue donut happening in NASDAQ as well, which I find very interesting because it's basically the same pattern as what we've seen on the Chinese server, which might just be like sort of an inevitability in sandbox games as well. So from that perspective, I personally still find all of this very, very interesting, and my personal playstyle to stay independent, to do my own stuff, I still enjoy it as well, no matter what happens in EVE. We'll see how things pan out in the future. Next up, we've got pyrite. Alright, a little bit of trying to get back to 4.5 ISK, but of course still meandering around a 1-year low point. Selling for 461, buyers at 425. Do we have a volume increase? Yeah, maybe a little bit right here. These two volumes are a little bit more substantial, so maybe some investments into pyrite for less than 4.5 is what we're seeing here. When it comes to Mexalon, that is going back up a little bit, managed to get back to above 75 ISK, 77.58 for the sellers, 71.66 for the buyers, a bit more margin, a bit more volatility, and of course the unique mineral, you could say, at the moment, because it's the bottleneck in NASDAQ. If there's anything that they need to still import in order to keep their production lines up and running, it is Mexalon. And here we have this strange disparity between all the other high-ISK minerals and Mexalon. The more the others crash, the higher Mexalon goes, because the more the others crash, the more they're being produced in NASDAQ, which also means that they need more Mexalon at the same time. And as you get this weird pattern of the one winner mineral still going up in price. And it should definitely be your focus when it comes to mining in high-ISK if you want to get as much efficiency as possible. Also quite noticeable here that the dip went with much lower volumes all of a sudden. So really, once you want to buy more, you need to pay the price for Mexalon. Isogen, probably not great news. Now crashed to less than 35 ISK and made its way back a little bit on more volumes, I would say here. So probably some investments right there, but still selling for 36.64 is an extremely low price. Buyers at 35.72. You know, they're probably reading stuff below 40 as still being okay, and definitely as close to 35 as we went here. Some investors jumped on that opportunity, but it's not good news for Isogen. I would say it's probably the most overproduced mineral in NASDAQ then, if this pattern holds up with Isogen continuously crashing down to that 1-year low point, even with strong volatility from its previous low point of around 40 ISK without much resistance, and compare that to what Mexalon's been doing. Isogen might just be the overproduced mineral of NASDAQ. And again, you know, if you want me to speculate a bit more on the futures, this would be one of the markets where CCP at some point might just intervene when it comes to resource production, because this is basically the flood of minerals that is happening in the game at the moment. Yeah, I'm just going to point to endlessly respawning asteroid fields, mineable anomalies. That is something that perhaps at some point, if things get out of hand too much, that CCP might look into. It's speculation, keep that in mind. Next up, we've got Noxium here. You know, again, data point at 300 ISK, so you've got that same pressure. Noxium is a little bit, I would say, of a slightly weirder one as well, because it's not as uniformly available in HiSec, but selling for 353 ISK, and the buyers at 330. We are again at very cheap Noxium, basically still sellers 353, so that managed to make its way back up to this price range here. You know, sellers on average, buyers below average, but after a very tumultuous way down to bottom prices close to 300 ISK. When it comes to the nullsec minerals, let's take a look at Zydrine. Same story. This, of course, is not really due to only due to the nullsec situation, but also to the opening up of moon mining in HiSec. In detail, there are several more moon operations that are online, and all of these will yield some Zydrine, yield some megasite, and it is going to create more and more supply. So whoever made the big purchases here at just below 800 ISK, probably not the best idea. Still, sellers back at 814 ISK, but the buyers at 769 definitely want to drive the price back down. And as more and more moons come online, become productive in these minerals as well, in 0.5 systems and in wormhole space, it's only going to get worse. At the moment, the tide is still rising on mineral supplies, I would say. Megasite next, went as low as 875, bit of a recovery, but you can already see at the tail end here that that is being stopped as well by the market. 945 for the sellers. You know, Megasite might just end up structurally below 1000 ISK, which is really weird when it looks when you look at that from a historical perspective. Buyers at a 936, don't want to go all too much lower than 900, I don't think, but you know, the market has tested that before. It did a bit of a bounce and we're back under pressure. So definitely be careful. It's going to be quite dependent on how many people basically also enjoy my type of play style, where, you know, you're a one-man corp, you're a five-man corp, you're a tiny little HiSec corporation. What do you invest in? Yeah, well, at some point, let's just invest in that refinery on a moon, give us some megasite, give us some Zydrine, give some Tech 2 base materials, and yeah, it's just an extension of our playstyle, which creates even more supply here. And then finally, we also have a Morphite that is continuing to go down. Of course, that was practically inevitable. Managed to hold strong at 10,000 ISK for almost a month, but now 9,536 for the sellers, 9,150 for the buyers. Mineral market is definitely under pressure, which creates this dichotomy that Mexilon is actually going up in price. Next up, we've got the PI market at 1720. And there we go. So let's go over this one. Personally, yeah, more activity, more economic activity, and more refineries being built. Nullsec continuing to create fortresses full of structures everywhere. Strong demand, I would say, is going to be the general vibe that I get from this, especially in these advanced PI materials. And you can see that broadcast nodes are definitely coming above their average ranges here. 2.4 million for the sellers, 2.3 million for the buyers. A bit more expensive than normal because, of course, of all this construction that's happening everywhere in New Eden. The most interesting metric for me personally, which might eventually have an impact on the Tech 2 prices, is of course the fuel related PI materials, because I think that you need many more moons to come online, but if that does happen, you've got more fuel demand as well, and so that's going to be my gauge to see if Tech 2 supplies might be going up as well. Construction blocks, after reaching 13,000 ISK, are back down though to around 12,000 ISK, 11,900 for the sellers, 10,800 for the buyers. I would say sellers on average and buyers a bit below average, 10,800. Yeah, actually buyers well below average. A slight buy opportunity, probably due to the volatility of the downturn here in construction blocks. Consumer electronics though continuing to stay quite strong. I would say that you'll probably need many of these to create stuff like the broadcast nodes, and so that is selling for 16,000 ISK. Lack of supply is clearly visible. Buyers at 14,300. A great time to produce consumer electronics. Coolants. Not showing that resurgence just yet. The volume increase is quite interesting though, but we are staying at the 8,000 to 9,000 is trade range, 8,400 for the sellers, 8,350 for the buyers. So we're definitely still at bottom coolant prices. Enriched uranium next. That is, you know, the first one that at least crawled out of the bottom and made its way back to not its normal trade range, but not as much of a margin anymore. 11,700 for the sellers, that's almost reasonable for enriched uranium historically speaking, and 11,000 for the buyers. A little bit of margin as well, showing that I would say, yeah, if sellers can dictate the price, they can also command a bit of a margin in enriched uranium, which might indicate some extra demand there. Integrity response drones actually went up to 3 million ISK, comes back down a little bit, but again you can see the premium when it comes to PI that is related to structures. 2.7 million for the sellers, 2.6 million for the buyers, definitely above average. Mechanical parts, all right, a little bit of a tick up. It's only in the last few days, but are we above 9,000 ISK? 9,800 for the sellers. That's actually not so bad. 8,700 for the buyers. It is a wide margin, but again, if the sellers manage to go up, I would say that there is this indication that demand might be growing for fuel-related PI materials. Nuclear reactors, a nice little comeback here over the last few 1.5 months, I would say, from 93,000 ISK and currently selling for 125,000 ISK. 119,000 for the buyers is not bad either, so pretty good here. The nuclear reactors, definitely a winner that we could have invested in after this sharp drop off. Easy purchases over 2 to 3 months below 100,000 ISK and currently already selling for 125. Pretty damn good. I do think if that demand stays up and if the stability remains and people just keep building up throughout New Eden, that will need to be to keep a very close eye on that if we want to spot a buy opportunity. It might not go below 100,000 ISK as cleanly as it did before. Robotics, again, fuel-related PI back to 100,000 ISK, probably still cheaper than what we had in the last year or so, but also not at the 90,000 bottom price, which it crashed down to after Moon Mining showed that you need much less fuel in order to keep those facilities up and running. So I would say slight indication that there is a good, decent demand, not yet growing demand for fuel-related PI materials. 97,000 for the sellers, 93,600 for the buyers. Decent stability there, slight pressure to be seen, but at least the volumes are increasing as well. And on this low volume bracket here, we don't see too much movement on the price either. So I would say the market is actually seeing this as a bottom. Next up, we've got the self-harmonizing power cores. Again, you can clearly see the premium that we're paying. No real breakout here, but 2.35 million for the sellers and 2.26 million for the buyers. So again, about 100,000 ISK in margin between the two. You're paying that premium for structure construction at the moment. Superconductors, nice little surge up in price here. That's interesting because I'm making these from the 11 to 12,000 trade range, going and selling to 13,200 ISK, 300 even. So a little bit above average here. Buyers force up to 12,600, slightly above average as well. So you could definitely unload some superconductors if you have them. And then we got test cultures that is continuing its downtrend here, selling for less than 8,000 ISK, buyers at 7,800. I would say for the longer term, because this is again a structure related spike, you could start your investments in test cultures, in my opinion. And finally, we have the Wetmare mainframes also breaking out to 2.8 million almost 2.8 million for the sellers, 2.7 million for the buyers. Again, that construction premium is definitely there in the advanced PI materials. Next up, let's take a look at Tech 1 chips at 2330. And there we go. And well, of course, our expectations are quite stable to low because of the mineral market situation here. So the apocalypse is still slowly creeping back to a more reasonable average price because of the arms race event that's already 2.5 months away to 3 months away, in fact. And the market has yet to absorb that. So it does show the lack of demand for the apocalypse at the moment, selling for 140 million, buyers at 126 million, definitely on the cheap side. The Caracal, a little bit of a resurgence, that's quite interesting. It did go as low as 9 million though. And, ooh, what the hell? Excuse me, I had to sneeze there. A seller coming in at 8.6 million. That's quite strange. Let's say that most of them are selling for 10 million on the Caracal, 8.6 million for the buyers here. This is just 10 million is a normal sell price to 9 million. Normally you're a little bit higher on the buyers here. So a little bit of a margin forming due to some volatility. But overall, I would say that the pressure will be back on quite quickly. Even if it's not 8.6 million, you'll start to see 9.8, 9.7 as minerals continue to be under pressure mostly. Catalyst next after Bernjita, of course, which was obviously in the preparation zone here in the last few months. So it was a gamble, but I was correct in assuming that was happening. Breaking and heading back for 1 million ISK, 1.2 million for the sellers, 1.15 million for the buyers. But look at the supplies coming in. Those margins will get crushed quite quickly. The Drake next also managed to get to 15 million ISK. I'm not exactly sure why, but now here I would say in the last 10 days or so we are going down in price, and that is due to the possibility to produce them more cheaply. 47 for the sellers, 41 million for the buyers. Decent supply as well. Next up we've got the Ferox. After the nerf announcement, it's staying at, well, the lower trade range of around 45 million ISK. In fact, one coming in at 43 million. Again, I'm not sure, is this like an attempt at manipulating the market a little bit? Why, if you put this up, why not just sell it to this guy for the 0.01 ISK? It's not really gonna make much of a difference. It's weird, these are pretty weird sell orders, but alright, 49 million for the sellers and 43 million for the buyers. The fact that the chart is here at 45 million, I would say indicates that it's a little bit on both sides, the action. Next up we've got the Hurricane at 45 million, again pretty cheap for a battlecruiser, selling at 49 million and 43 for the buyers. I do personally start to like the pattern here a little bit. So the Ferox, the volumes are pretty low, but considering that we are talking 50 to 100 a day, this is very low, and you've got this decently healthy margin. This could actually still go either way if we could somehow get Tech 1 chips more into the meta again, which is of course going to be very tricky to do at the moment. But even on the Ferox here, you've got 49 million for the sellers, 43 million for the buyers. Here you've got a little bit more supply, but I would say that the volumes are more often above 100 as well, and closer to 100 as well. So I would say that this is actually okay here in the Tech 1 battlecruiser markets, primed to show some actual market activity, some more volatile prices, if we could get them back in the meta. Next up here we've got the Megatron, arms race and recovery to 150. Tried to go back up, but I would say under pressure at the tail end. Well, 157 for the sellers, 141 for the buyers. Still not so bad. Again, decently healthy margin, I would say. The Oracle next, that one is under pressure. Are we back below 75? Well, sellers still at 76, 68 million for the buyers though. Yeah, I'm seeing this margin opening up between sellers and buyers of Tech 1 ships. I do wonder what's behind that. We've got the Raven next, basically staying above 150, 162 for the sellers, 150 for the buyers. That's almost like a 10% margin, pretty close to that. You can do something with that on trades. Next up we've got the Retriever. That one is obviously under pressure, heading for 20 million, 21 for the sellers, 19.6 for the buyers. But this is what I'm actually trying to say. I think you've got increased volumes, probably due to increased supplies, which actually show up on the chart as a decrease in price from 23 million down to 20 million, which is mostly the sellers doing stuff, and the buyers are still trying to pick them up for less than 20 million. But now if all of this supply can then move to another ship that's got a little bit of a margin, like let's say the Megatron, you could start to see these swings show up depending on, well, probably what's in the meta mostly, which is hopefully the balance team can bring some activity to the Tech 1 market through this method. I would say that the market is able to do that, just because the volumes aren't completely crazy despite all the resource mining that's happening. The Tempest is at 149 for the sellers and 137 for the buyers. Again, pretty decent margin on stable prices. The Thrasher is, well, again, recovering, I would say, from Bernjita as well. 1 million for the sellers, 900,000 for the buyers. 900,000 for the buyers is right here. That's actually pretty cheap, and with that margin closing, we are seeing pretty big supplies. That's exactly the pattern that I was expecting. Next up here, we've got the Tornado, actually meandering a bit around 65 million ISKs now, 66 for the sellers, 57 for the buyers. But again, that high potential up to 70 million compared to buyers at 57 million is definitely not so bad. So yeah, let's keep this going. Volume-wise here, we've got a little bit more, but that's also on those on that downward trend here. So okay, very nice, I would say, for potentially getting that Tech 1 market to move a little bit more than what it's done in the last few years. Here's the Tristan stabilizing at 500,000 ISK, of course frigate, so you do get more production of that quite more quickly. Venture, same thing, actually selling for 250 around there, probably not a bad price for the Venture. And then finally the Vexor crashing down in price to 9 million ISK on the chart, and that is going to be on pretty big supply. Exactly. So here we go, lack of demand, 8.4 million for the buyers, but look at this, 100 of them at 10 million, 100 of them at 9.9 million, 110 of them at 9.5 million, and then another 150 or so at 9 million ISK. Just massive supplies crashing down this market. The real question is, of course, can we somehow get the Vexor in the meta so that it's used and lost, so that we can absorb this a bit more quickly and then have more volatility on the markets. It'll depend a little bit, I would say, on the plans for the rebalancing team from CCP, but I see that potential might be there for the Tech 1 market. Next up, we've got the Tech 2 market, of course, at 31 minutes. And here, of course, I am still looking for that second leg down. The Aries unfortunately not doing so, going back above 30 million for the buyers at almost 31, buyers at 27.5. So the first one here showing that no, maybe we should look for buy opportunities below 30 million, as you know, that's actually a good price for a frigate. The Cerberus also managed to spike back up and is currently selling for 258 million ISK. So a bit of a spike and quick recovery on that one. The Claw heading back for 30 million as well. So still selling for 30, buyers at 27 million ISK. The one thing that I'm sort of happy about is that it's not a massive break back to 35 million ISK. So we'll see. Next up here we got the Crow actually going down below 30 million ISK, selling for 29, buyers at 26.5. Keep it up. I want those lower prices actually. The Crusader staying below 30 million as well. A little bit of meandering here, but no massive breakouts anymore. So I'm basically hoping that this pattern can actually end up becoming this pattern again, and we have a potential to go towards like 25 million or something like that on higher production, which we'll check. The extra material is of course advanced moon materials this week to see if all those moons are having an impact there. Here's the Heretic starting to play with less than 70 million ISK. Yep, 68 for the sellers, 64 almost for the buyers. That's a bit of pressure on there. I like the look of that. The Hound is still going around 30 million ISK, so selling for 29 actually. Bits of supply coming in the last couple of hours is gonna put more pressure on the Hound, so you could see that that one is actually going to go down. The Ishtar went to less than 250, not so bad. Currently selling for 254, and then look at that, 237 for the buyers. They want the Ishtar to go down in price. I would say, yeah, here are the spikes. Make these again higher price points actually, and then maybe we can get back to like a 30 million trade range or something like that. Manticore very stable, unfortunately staying above 30 million, 32 for the seller. Supply wise nothing too crazy either, so we really do need this structurally to become more supply, easier supply, cheaper ships before this will actually go down. Hopefully it'll come. Here's the Nemesis, actually went to 25 million, which is what I would personally be looking for. If you can have buy orders below 25 million, you know, there you could try to snatch some up. I think some people did as well. Look at those volumes there, putting the price back up to 28 million ISK, but 26.5 for the sellers on more supply, which I like to see. 24.5 for the buyers. Again, they do want those cheaper Tech 2 ships, which I would say you could still risk that. If you want the Nemesis here, buy that to 24.6, anything below 25 million, I would say on nullsec activity might be a good investment. Long term, of course, I would expect that that might not be the best. Pontifex next, also pretty stable but slowly landing at 75 million ISK. Seller still at 81.4 though. The Purifier could be interesting, bouncing off of 30 million several times. Let's take a look at supply here, 32.4 million, but that's a decent amount of supply coming in at 35 and more coming in, lowering the price again. Okay, hopefully we can break 30 million at some point. The Raptor wants to do that as well. Look at the tail end here. Less volatility, less high peaks, and here trying to get to less than 30 million ISK here. 31 for the sellers, 29 million for the buyers. Supply wise, well, it's still 10, 35 here, 11 here, all of them putting more pressure on the price. The Saber, same thing, heading for 70 million for the Destroyer, seems to be the name of the game. The Stiletto, too bad here, went to 29 million ISK, but surged back up here all of a sudden to 34, still current data points, or, yep, sellers back at 29 million, buyers at 27.4 with 23, 26, 32, 41. Decent supply of Stilettos available on the market. Let's make it happen. Next up, the Stork. That one was really one of the big winners. These command destroyers commanding 90 million ISK for a Tech 2 destroyer. Quite expensive. Is also landing now at 70 million ISK for the destroyer. So I mean, here the destroyer pattern is basically showing that, yeah, this was not very realistic. We're going down to 70 million ISK. Look at the previous trade range, 60 to 70 million ISK here. So potentially we could definitely stabilize much closer to the prices before the moon mining changes. Here for now, I would say that something like the Stork here and then also the Saber landing, all of them landing at 70 million ISK, although the Saber used to cost 50 to 60 million ISK, but the Stork here with that massive crash and then supply, look at that, still 135.16 here, is potentially showing that we might have that second leg down at some point. And then finally we've got the Tyrannies also, well, heading down to 25 million ISK. On this type of volatility, I would say you could try to buy them close to 23 million for an investment. Try and risk a little bit of a trade on this one. I would say it is possible if someone needs an interceptor fleet all of a sudden, well, they're seeing how much cheaper the Tyrannies are than most of the others above 30 million, they might actually make that investment. So this is a nice little downturn, and 25 million coming into play. I like to see it. Look at this here. Right after the changes, first leg down, second leg down. I think it can happen. Next up, we've got the Tech 3 market at 37.10. There we go. Here, personal expectation, more stability. Here is the Confessor actually going to less than 40 million ISK. Yep, on 270.42. Here, right away, I get this. The specter of oversupply due to stability is showing up. What will the bottom be? That is basically the name of the game on this. At some point there is bound to be some sort of action in Nullsec. I do believe that. And then stuff like the Confessor, the Jackdaw, but also I would say Tengus might still get used, Legions, Loki's also. They will then show up at much better prices. But the trick at this point is going to be try to find the bottom. As more supply keeps trickling in, as more big sellers come in now, well, I'm going to try and sell 270 of them at 39 million. Well, someone is coming in. I've got another 42 lying around. I'm going to compete with you. So they might keep pulling each other down here quite substantially. And finding that bottom is going to be very difficult. So here I would say try and spot the right buy opportunities and have ISK left so that you can have a later purchase at an even lower price to lower your averages. So the Confessor obviously under pressure, heading for less than 40 million ISK. Here is the Hecate, try to go back up, but look at that, crushed right back to 40 million ISK here. Sellers coming in at 42, and look at these numbers here, 19, 12, 47, 45, another 14, another 19, another 15 is going to make this happen even more. It's basically on the buyers to have some patience and to pull these down to less than 35 million as well, and then we'll see the Hecate show the same pattern as the Confessor. The Jackdaw next was tried to research, but also coming back down, currently selling for 41 million with 136 here, 37 here. The specter of oversupply here, it's you know, a couple months ago you had these types of numbers in maybe one or two of these destroyers. Now you're seeing hundreds of these ships coming to the market in most of them. Here is the Zwepel chart landing nicely at 40 million ISK. And then let's take a look at the numbers here. The Zwepel is actually not super oversupplied, but the 3 others are. And so I'm seeing more and more of this looming on the horizon. Let's take a look at the cruisers as well then. Here's the Legion chart, again heading down in price as well, which I would say indicates decently strong supply. 137 million for the sellers. I mean, this is actually a pretty cheap Legion. If you look at the rest of this chart here, it used to be 150 to 180 was what you would have to do to pay to pick one up. And supply-wise here, it's these 200 Legions at 140 that are driving these prices back down. And who knows, when another 200 come in at 135, that would be another leg down or something like that. So be careful. Here is the Loki landing at 200 million ISK, and look at that, 186 of them at 200 million ISK. That's the exact pattern that I was a little bit afraid of. Next up, you know, they're gonna start competing down here, and then you'll have 200 of them coming in at 190 million ISK. So always be careful here, and definitely don't buy them from the sellers as the investment at the moment. Have the patience and try to pick one up for like 185 on these buy orders or something like that. Next up here we get the Proteus, again showing the pressure after a very stable period here, heading for 130, 132 million. And who is the culprit? 280 of them at 140 million. And if this guy ever wants to get rid of some of these Protei, he's gonna put them back up at 130 at some point, which is then of course, if it continues to be oversupplied, gonna put us in yet another lower price range. Next up here we get the Tengu coming in at 150. Yeah, and here, you know, the sellers are still hesitating a little bit to go even lower for the Tengu, but look at that, 300 and 395 of them. I mean, it's just in the upcoming weeks, you've got the competition going on here in the 145 to 150 range, I would say, and buyers coming in at 140. You know, it's oversupply specter is definitely looming for me on the Tech 3 market. So if you're looking for these investments, I would say what looks actually interesting might just be something like the Legion with buyers at 120. Well, I'd like to see that below 125 personally. The Loki's got a pretty healthy margin, but definitely don't buy from the sellers, and definitely don't put all the ISK on a single purchase, on a single buy order. Just make sure that you've got some time to maybe lower your averages later on. And then for the extra product this week at 42 minutes, that's okay. We'll take Advanced Moon Materials. I am curious to see if some of them are going down in price. So we're talking manufacturing, materials, and reaction. Advanced Moon Materials. Let's take a look at this chart. Here is crystalline carbide, moon mining spike, and then here stabilizing, coming closer and closer to the previous trade range, which was just below 200. Is currently selling for 210, so that is definitely closing in. And look at the supplies here, 500 million units coming in. I wouldn't be surprised if we'll actually land back on that previous trade range. Next up here we've got fermion condensates, actually at a 1-year high point of 100,000 ISK. Pretty much that is definitely not one that is being massively oversupplied all of a sudden. Fernite carbide though, heading back for less than 200 ISK here. 200 for the sellers, 196 for the buyers. Ferrogel next, 40k, a little bit above its previous average. I'm really looking for some Fullerites, not exactly sure what you need for that, but selling for less than 1000 ISK at this point. Still has a ways to go. Hypersynaptic fibers next, also stable at a higher trade range. Nano transistors also going up towards 5000 ISK, previous trade range 3000 ISK. Non-linear metamaterials, look at that, going from 20,000 ISK and currently selling for 27,000 ISK. All right, bit of an increase in price here, definitely. What I do like is that after the moon mining spike, we went back to the previous average prices. This is actually a really interesting chart if you're looking to actively trade in stuff, which might be something that we should look into, because Tech 2, I'm a little bit afraid of that. Tech 3 oversupplied. Tech 1 needs to get back into the meta. What are you gonna trade in? How about some advanced moon materials? This is definitely a tradable chart here. Next up we've got the phenolic Some of them will be more stable though, and I think for the more stable ones, what we'd be looking for is a downtrend. 20-day moving average definitely under pressure here, managing to come back to the daily averages as well of 2,100 ISK. Still has a ways to go to get back to its previous average though. Photonic metamaterials also still, you know, some movement, but around that new normal trade range of 15,000 ISK. Maybe it just takes more time before this will actually show up in advanced moon materials. The fact that there's more supply in the base materials from moon mining here. Plasmionic metamaterials also just, you know, trading for around 18,000 ISK, and basically in the last few months we've been there, previous trade range below 15,000 ISK. Ceramic fibers definitely trading at a 1-year price point here. Terahertz metamaterials climbing back up, heading for a 1-year price point as well, selling for 23.5 thousand ISK, definitely a bit more expensive at the moment. Titanium carbide next. Also, you know, nice volatility here though. Look at that bottom price, 200, high point 372, back down to 245, back up to 360, back down to 220. I mean, you can make some trades on this. That's quite nice. Next up here we got tungsten carbide. That one is going back down in price, down to 175, but still a premium from before the moon mining changes. So I think advanced moon materials quite interesting, especially some of these more volatile ones. Look at that 1-year high point for fermionic condensates. You could definitely have bought these for 80,000 ISK, and currently you're selling them for 100,000 ISK, 20% increase. No, it's actually 25% increase from your buy order. Not bad at all. But if you're looking for the longer future, I would say, of course, be a little bit careful because of the increased supply of base materials that will probably at some point show up in at least some of these advanced moon materials. And it's definitely not across the board. This is a lovely chart as well for trading. Some of the other ones are obviously stabilizing as well. But yeah, very interesting moon material market. I thought we'd see more speculative pressure on this one, generally speaking, from all the moons coming online, but we're not seeing that in the advanced moon materials. Some of them in fact are going up in price quite substantially all of a sudden. So very interesting situation. Perhaps at some point I'll have to take a look at these base materials that can be mined from 0.5 systems to see what the impact has been there, but I need to do a little bit of research on that to make it happen. Who knows, we'll try to make the time for it. For now, that's going to be it for this ETH Talk, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you all next time.